3 days after her grandfather's funeral, Stephanie returned to the hospital, not to grieve, but to demand answers. She didn't ask for permission. She entered the administration office and placed a signed healthcare proxy on the desk.
I was his healthcare proxy. Why was I kept from his ICU room?
The administrator opened the visitor log, scrolling through entries, her expression shifting to unease.
According to this, you were removed from the approved list by family members. They told us you didn't want to visit. That's a lie. I was his primary caregiver for 4 years. I would have been there if I'd known he was dying.
The administrator turned the screen toward Stephanie, pointing to a note in the visitor log. Family request. Stephanie refused.
They told everyone I refused. He died thinking I didn't want to be there. I need his complete medical records. I have the legal right as his proxy.
The administrator nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of what had just been unearthed, and promised to send the files. 4 years earlier, long before the ICU room, Stephanie had been the one constant in Frank's life.
You don't have to come every day, sweetheart. The nurses here talk enough for 3 people.
But she did come every day after work and on weekends, reading him the paper, managing medications, sitting through every appointment.
Remember, that crooked porch step you fixed when you were 12 still holds.
I remember you handing me the wrong nails on purpose so I'd have to come back for more.
I need you to be my healthcare proxy, Stephanie. Pamela and George can't be trusted with those decisions. Promise me you'll fight for what I'd want, even if the family pushes back.
I promise, Grandpa. No one will override your choices while I am here.
For 4 years, she was his lifeline, handling medications, appointments, and every legal form, and he made sure the world knew it, right up to the day his own children erased her name from the visitor list. The call came while Stephanie was at a wedding reception, laughing with old friends, the music loud.
A stroke. I am his healthcare proxy. I'll be on the next flight.
She left the reception without explanation, still in her dress, and raced to the airport. On the flight, she kept staring at a photo of Frank, her thumb tracing his smile, her chest tight. Hours later, she arrived at the ICU, still in her bridesmaid dress, and went straight to the nursing station.
I am sorry, but you've been removed from the approved visitor list by the family. That's impossible. I am his granddaughter. I held his power of attorney for medical decisions. The family told us you were emotionally unstable and did not want to be contacted. We had to follow their directive.
Through the glass wall of the ICU room, she saw Pamela and George standing beside Frank's bed, their backs to her, ignoring her presence.
They erased me. He thinks I abandoned him.
She retreated to the ICU waiting area and sat in a cold plastic chair, still in her bridesmaid dress, staring at the door that wouldn't open for her.
I can't just sit here. He needs me.
Hours passed. The corridor lights dimmed. She watched the door to Frank's room, her hope fading with every silent minute. Pamela and George eventually emerged from the room, walked past without a glance, and left the unit entirely.
I am so sorry, but your grandfather's condition has deteriorated rapidly. Can I see him now, please? I am afraid it's too late. He passed a few minutes ago.
The words hit like a physical blow. She doubled over in the plastic chair, a sob ripping from her chest.
I never got to say goodbye. He died believing I didn't love him.
She left the hospital before dawn, glancing back once at the empty ICU room through the glass, and carried the guilt home with her. Days after the funeral, Stephanie sat alone in her apartment, the guilt of not being there still an open wound.
I was his healthcare proxy. Why did they treat me like a stranger?
She pulled up the hospital's number and called, her voice steadier than she felt.
I am calling as Frank Morrison's legal healthcare proxy. I need his complete medical and visitor records.
The hospital clerk on the line told her she needed a formal HIPAA request with notarized documentation of her proxy status.
They're putting walls around the truth, but I'll find a way through.
The next morning, she consulted an attorney, a family friend, who assured her the proxy gave her an ironclad right.
Will that include the visitor logs and nurses' notes from his last hours?
With the attorney's help, she compiled every paper, the proxy, her ID, and a notarized letter demanding full disclosure. She mailed the envelope that afternoon by certified mail, Then all she could do was wait. 3 weeks passed. Then one afternoon, a thick envelope from the hospital arrived on her doorstep. She carried it inside and sat at the kitchen table, her heart pounding, before she could open it.
This is it. The last hours of his life in ink.
She spread the documents across the table, visitor logs, nurses' notes, medical charts, and began to read. The visitor log for his final day had her name crossed out, with a note beside it. Per family, Stephanie refuses to visit, but a nurse's note 3 entries later said, patient agitated, repeatedly asking to see Stephanie. Family stated she did not want to come.
He was asking for me. All that time, he thought I'd abandoned him.
She scanned further. The same request appeared again, 2 hours later, and again an hour after that. Her hands began to shake, and the words blurred through tears. She tried to keep going, but the weight of the lies pressed too hard. She pushed the papers away and buried her face in her hands, the truth still half read. After a long minute, Stephanie wiped her face and forced herself to pick up the papers again, dreading each line. The nurse's notes for 1422 read, patient agitated. Asking for Stephanie. Family told him she had been contacted, but refused to come. At 1645, another entry. Patient again requested Stephanie. Family reiterated that she did not want to visit. Then, at 1810, the final notation, patient lucid, called for Stephanie by name. Family said she was unavailable.
3 separate times they lied. Each entry marks a moment he was conscious and calling for me.
She turned the page and found a note from Nurse Christine, dated the same evening, flagged in the margin. Concern, family dynamic appears strained. Patient repeatedly asking for granddaughter. Family blocking access. I have documented per protocol.
Christine saw it. She knew something was wrong, and she wrote it down.
She closed the file, her sorrow crystallizing into a cold, clear purpose. She was no longer just grieving. She picked up her phone and scrolled to Christine's number. If the nurse had witnessed it, she needed to hear it spoken. Stephanie dialed Christine's number. She answered on the second ring, her voice cautious.
Christine, it's Stephanie Morrison. I got Frank's records. I need to talk about that night. I am not supposed to discuss patients outside the hospital, but I remember that night. Can we meet somewhere private?
They met the following afternoon at a quiet cafe, tucked into a corner booth away from prying ears.
Your grandfather was conscious much of that evening. He kept saying your name over and over. He wanted you there. I told your aunt and uncle he was asking for you. They said you'd been contacted but refused to come. Something felt off, so I documented it, but hospital policy forced me to follow the family's directive. I am sorry.
Stephanie didn't speak. She slid a printed page across the table, her finger resting on Christine's own note.
That's my note. I documented everything I saw, just in case. I wish I could have done more. Now I have proof. They lied, and I am going to make sure everyone knows what they did.
That evening, she sat on her bed and considered her options, a lawsuit, a letter, a public post. None felt right.
A courtroom would drag out the pain. I need them to see the truth in their own hands, where they can't look away.
The next morning, she went to a copy shop and duplicated the critical pages, the visitor log, the 3 nurses' notes, Christine's report. Back at her kitchen table, she sorted the copies into piles, one for each aunt, uncle, cousin. No exceptions. She wrote names on each: Uncle Paul, Aunt Rita, Cousin Brandon. And for Pamela and George, she wrote nothing but the evidence. On the last envelope, she wrote simply, "To my family." It would be her quiet record.
No screaming, no tears, just the truth, in their hands.
She placed the stack of envelopes into her tote bag, the weight of them a strange comfort. The funeral repast was in 3 days. She would attend, not as a mourner, but as the bearer of an unerasable record.
For Grandpa. He asked for me, and they'll know he never stopped.
The night before the funeral repast, Stephanie stood in her apartment entryway, the loaded tote bag at her feet. The silence was enormous. She carried the bag into her bedroom and sat on the bed, unzipping it to check the envelopes one last time.
Tomorrow, I'll walk into that hall and hand them out without a word. The pages will speak for me.
She imagined Pamela's sharp voice, the judgment in George's eyes, but the fear didn't stop her. She pulled out the envelope marked "To my family" and traced the letters with her thumb.
No accusations, no shouting, just the truth, placed gently in their hands.
She set the bag next to her pillow, within arm's reach, so she wouldn't forget it in the morning. Then she undressed in the dark, letting the silence settle over her like a second skin. A tear slipped down her cheek, but she wiped it away before it could stain the pillow.
This is for Grandpa. He deserves a voice tomorrow.
The morning of the repast, Stephanie walked into the funeral home alone, her tote bag heavy against her shoulder. She chose a pew near the back, where she could see every face without being seen. The air smelled of lilies and old wood.
Look at them up front. Pamela in designer grief, George already practicing his sad eyes.
George stepped to the podium and delivered a eulogy that praised Frank's commitment to family unity, words that clanged like a false bell.
Family unity. The same unity that locked me out of his final hours.
Pamela sobbed loudly into a handkerchief, and cousins rushed to comfort her, a performance Stephanie watched with hollow eyes. When the service ended, the family lined up to pay final respects. Stephanie waited until the last moment, then walked to the open casket alone. She reached down and gently touched her grandfather's hand, the skin cold and still.
I am sorry I couldn't say goodbye, but I'll make it right.
As the family slowly migrated to the repast hall, she stayed back, adjusting the bag on her shoulder, ready for what came next. The repast hall filled with the murmur of low voices and the clink of coffee cups. Family circled the buffet table, trading memories. Pamela received a stream of embraces, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. George shook hands and murmured about Dad's final piece.
Final piece. As if they hadn't built a wall around his last hours to keep me out.
She found a spot near a window and set her bag on a chair, keeping a hand on the zipper. David caught her eye with a small, sorrowful nod.
Even David knows something was stolen. I can't wait any longer.
She unzipped the bag and drew out the stack of envelopes, the paper stiff and new against her fingers. She held them upright, like a deck of cards she was about to deal, and turned toward the cluster of aunts and uncles.
No speech, no accusation. Just these pages. Let them read.
She walked forward, the envelopes now held at her side, her footsteps silent on the thin carpet. Her Aunt Rita was the first to notice. Stephanie extended an envelope, and the room began to still. Stephanie placed an envelope into Aunt Rita's hand, then another into Uncle Paul's, her face unreadable. Cousins and second aunts took the envelopes with puzzled looks, tearing them open as if they held party favors. Cousin Brandon scanned a nurse's note, then looked up sharply, his mouth opening as the ink hit his mind. A low murmur spread, heads lifting from coffee cups. The noise of the room reshaped itself into a charged quiet. Pamela noticed the disruption. She pushed through a small cluster of relatives, eyes narrowing on Stephanie's stack.
What is this, Stephanie? What are you handing out at my father's funeral? Stay calm. They're reading it themselves.
An elderly aunt held the page at arm's length, her lips moving as she read the words "patient," repeatedly asking for Stephanie. She raised her eyes to Pamela, then to George, and the question in her gaze was louder than any shout. The repast froze. Every envelope now open, every face now turned toward the woman who had made silence louder than a scream. Pamela lunged toward Aunt Rita's paper, her fingers clawing, but Rita pulled the sheet against her chest.
This is private. You have no right to ruin my father's funeral with your lies.
George pushed through the stunned relatives, his face flushing crimson as he saw the papers everywhere.
What the hell is this, Stephanie? Explain yourself right now.
Stephanie met his glare without a flinch and gestured to the pages already in every hand.
It's all right there. The visitor log, the nurse's notes. They show he asked for me 3 times.
Cousin Brandon raised a photocopied note, his hand trembling as he scanned the crowd. He read aloud, his voice shaking. Family stated Stephanie refused to come. That's exactly what the nurse wrote. The accusation hung in the air like smoke, Several relatives stepped back from Pamela and George. Pamela's mouth opened in protest, but no words came. The family's united front was crumbling into 1,000 paper cuts. Aunt Rita stepped forward, holding the photocopied page out like a prosecutor's exhibit. Her voice trembled but cut through the silence. He was asking for her. It's written right here.
We were protecting him. You don't understand the whole situation. Protecting him from me. I was his caregiver for 4 years. I was his healthcare proxy.
A tear slipped down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it. Her hand remained steady, pointing at the document.
He asked for me 3 times that night. Each time you told the nurses I refused to come.
George's face reddened, his jaw working silently. He said nothing, just looked at the exit. Without a word, he turned and shoved past Cousin Brandon, heading for the door. The crowd parted, murmuring, as the patriarch of the family fled from his own father's funeral repast. Stephanie stood alone in the center of the room, still holding the last envelope, her heart pounding but her feet planted. As George neared the door, Cousin Brandon stepped into his path, arms crossed and jaw set.
Get out of my way. I don't have to answer to any of you.
Another relative stepped in beside Brandon, effectively sealing the exit without a word.
We did what was best for the family image. You don't know what she's capable of.
Aunt Rita's voice cut through from the crowd, steady and accusatory. You denied a dying man his granddaughter.
That's not how it was. She was unstable. We were protecting everyone from her drama.
Stephanie watched, a fresh tear sliding down her cheek. She didn't interrupt. The evidence had already spoken. The room seemed to shrink around Pamela. Her words echoed back at her, hollow and unconvincing. George stood frozen by the door, trapped between the cold stares and the weight of his own lies. The repast had become a quiet courtroom, and every juror held a photocopy in their hand. From a chair near the back, Frank's oldest friend, David, slowly pushed himself upright. The room fell quieter still. He walked toward Stephanie, and the crowd parted instinctively, creating a path between the elderly man and the granddaughter. When he reached her, he took her hand in his, and she felt the tremor run through his fingers.
He was asking for you, Stephanie. I heard him call your name. I am sorry I didn't push them harder.
The sob that escaped Stephanie was relief and grief in equal measure, finally released. A murmur rippled through the family, not of dissent, but of sorrowful confirmation. David had spoken aloud what the papers had only hinted. The accusatory glares shifted from the papers to Pamela and George, standing isolated, their last defenses crumbling. A stern voice from the crowd cut Pamela off before she could utter another word, leaving her gaping in silence.
He never stopped loving you, child. That's all he talked about in those last hours.
There was no verdict spoken, but the silence that followed was more damning than any judgment. Stripped of every defense, Pamela's eyes darted around the room, landing on the one accusation she thought might save her.
You are all fools. She only wanted the inheritance. That's all she ever cared about.
A voice from the back, Cousin Brandon's, cut through, flat and clear. Cousin Brandon's voice came from the back. He didn't have any money, Pamela. We all know that. The final excuse collapsed, and a few relatives even laughed bitterly, a sound of release. In that moment, George finally shoved past the man blocking the door and strode into the hallway, not looking back. No one moved to stop him this time. The family simply let him go, his departure a quiet admission of defeat. An elderly aunt stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Stephanie, holding her as if to shield her from the lingering cruelty.
You did right, child. He would be proud.
The repast dissolved into quiet clusters of relatives who finally understood the girl they had nearly lost. As the repast wound down, a small procession of aunts and cousins made their way toward Stephanie, their faces full of regret. Aunt Rita reached her first, voice trembling. I should have asked more questions. I am so sorry.
Thank you, but it's not necessary. I am just glad the truth is finally out.
She knelt and picked up a stray envelope from the floor, the last piece of evidence, forgotten in the chaos.
This is all that's left of what they did, and it's enough.
Then, Holding her tote bag close, she walked toward the exit, past the empty chairs and half-eaten plates. She pushed open the heavy door, and the late afternoon sun flooded her face with welcome warmth. She paused on the steps and looked back once at the building, then at the envelope in her hand.
It's over. The truth is out. Now, I just need to find peace.
Then she turned and walked to her car, the envelope tucked against her heart, and drove away without looking back again. 3 weeks later, a lawyer's office held the family again, this time around a polished table, tension thicker than ever. The lawyer cleared his throat and began reading Frank's last will and testament, the air heavy with anticipation. To my granddaughter, Stephanie, I leave the lake cabin I built with my own hands, a deed transferred 3 years ago. Stephanie's hand flew to her mouth, her breath catching in her throat as the words registered.
He knew. He knew they would try to cut me out, so he made sure I was protected. That can't be. The cabin should be mine. She manipulated him.
The lawyer silenced her with a raised hand and explained the transfer on death deed, executed 3 years prior. George sat motionless, his face pale, his silence speaking louder than any protest. Stephanie looked across the table at David, who gave a slow, knowing nod. He had known all along. The will was dated 2 years before his death, with a handwritten note, "For my Stephanie, always."
He always knew you would be the one to love it most, child. He made sure of it.
Stephanie looked down at the signed deed, her fingers tracing Frank's signature, and the tears she had held back now fell freely. Across the table, Pamela stared blankly at the wall, her protests spent, her face a mask of defeat. George remained frozen, his silence now a permanent fixture of the small, defeated space he occupied. David gave Stephanie's hand a final squeeze, and then she rose from her chair, the deed clutched to her chest. Without a word to Pamela or George, she walked past them and out of the room, her heels the only sound on the hardwood. She pushed open the building's front door and stepped into the midday sun, the warmth washing over her face.
He protected me, even after he was gone. Now I have a piece of us that they can never take.
She looked down at the deed one more time, then placed it carefully into her bag, next to the last envelope from the repast. Then she walked to her car, and this time she didn't look back at all. Months later, summer arrived at the lake cabin, the air sweet with pine, and the gentle lapping of water against the dock. Stephanie sat on the wooden rocking chair, a cup of tea cooling in her hand, her gaze fixed on the distant shore.
He built this porch with his own hands. I can almost hear his laugh in the creak of the boards.
In her lap rested a worn photograph of her and Frank, taken on this very porch decades ago. Inside, the cabin had been carefully restored, Frank's tools on the workbench, his photo on the mantel, a fire crackling softly. Every summer now, she would come here, to the place that held his memory, and now, her peace. As dusk fell, she remained on the porch, watching the sky turn amber and gold, the first stars emerging. She stood and walked to the edge of the porch, looking out at the water that had always been her grandfather's sanctuary. A soft smile touched her lips as she whispered to the wind, "I am here, Grandpa, just like you wanted." The cabin glowed behind her, a small light against the vast night, a promise kept across the years.